Welcome to the Risk and Repeat podcast, episode number 243. I'm Rob Wright, Security News Director at Informa Tech Target, and I am here with Senior Security News Writer Alex Kalafi. Alex, welcome.
Thanks, Rob.
How are you doing on this lovely Friday morning in mid-December?
Fine. It really Let me ask you, is security news really this busy at the end of the year usually, or is this unusual?
Uh, I don't know. I guess it ebbs and flows. Some years, yes,
Okay.
some years, no.
Okay. Usually the
Just,
summer's quiet.
yeah, yeah. Although not
Yeah.
always. This summer, definitely not quiet. Had some
No.
had some big things happening, which we may discuss on a future pod.
That was CrowdStrike, I think was probably the biggest one,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and before we get into today's business, I guess we should just note that yes, we are if the listeners out there have not heard the news, seen the news, we are now Informa Tech Target as of
Mm-hmm.
a couple weeks ago.
Yep.
So, yeah.
Shouldn't change anything on the reader or listener side, really.
Yeah,
So,
but there you have it.
yep.
We are going to discuss today some interesting news that unfolded this week regarding, I guess, zero-day vulnerability exploitation, zero-day attacks on a managed file transfer product or series of products
Mm-hmm.
from a software vendor, smaller software vendor called Cleo. Cleo Communications, I believe, is the full name. They go by Cleo. Interesting story here. I don't know that we have all of the answers as to what's going on, but Alex, you wrote one of the stories that we published on this week.
Yep.
Uh, I know Ariel did the first story. Was that feels like forever ago? Was that
Mm-hmm.
Tuesday? Oh my God.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was Monday or Tuesday, and things have sort of ramped up a little bit over the course of the week.
Yeah, they sure have. Uh,
Hmm.
why don't you sort of recap and we can discuss the details here, and then we'll get into why this is an interesting story beyond sort of the zero-day angle
Sure.
and
So,
go from there.
mhm. Okay. In late October, Clio patched a vulnerability which it described as an unrestricted file upload and download vulnerability. That's CVE 2024 50623. That was patched on I believe October 30th. And it affects three of their MFT products, Harmony, LexiCom, and VLTrader, in versions prior to 5.8.0.21. Couple months pass, or maybe a month and a half, and then Huntress, a managed security vendor, they sort of discovered that, hey, threat actors are targeting this vulnerability and trying to exploit it, and they are even having some at least apparent success against customers that do have 5.8.0.21 installed.
Mm,
And then they released a blog the next day where they recommended that Clio customers should just have their instance behind a firewall because this doesn't seem fully patched yet. And then I think it was maybe Tuesday that it became known through maybe a paywalled advisory that there was actually possibly a second vulnerability that still does not have a CVE, that is a little bit different, or a lot of bit different, and that also appears to be tied up in this activity somehow, some way. Exactly how, it has not been made clear to the public yet. And
hmm
then Wednesday, Clio released a second patch Wednesday night that addressed this critical flaw that still does not have a CVE. They said it addresses a critical vulnerability which exploits the ability for unrestricted file upload and download and executes malicious host definitions in the product. Um, but there was a separate security advisory which they did separate from their other advisory for 50623, where they said the vulnerability could allow an unauthenticated user to import and execute arbitrary bash or PowerShell commands on the host system by leveraging the default settings of the auto run directory, which sounds pretty different from what we know about 50623.
Mm.
And Cleo advised customers to upgrade to the fixed version. We asked them if this activity was related to, or if this new vulnerability was related to activity against 50623. They didn't give us a very clear answer on that. Um, and John Hammond of Huntress posted to X saying that at least at first glance, the new update released Wednesday, 5.8.0.24, appears to be effective at preventing their current POC that they have access to, their POC exploit for this undesignated vulnerability, which they referred to as 0 day. He referred to as a 0 day,
Hmm.
but it doesn't appear to fix 50623. So there's still quite a few gaps in our conclusive knowledge in this. One, we don't know who the threat actors are exactly who are targeting this. Kevin Beaumont said the termite ransomware group, which is sort of an emerging one, could be or it was behind these attacks. But then we asked Rapid7, and they're like, based on our information, we think that's kind of speculation at this time. And then possibly other ransomware groups, but it's still not clear. And then it's also not clear how this vulnerability that still doesn't have a CVE interacts with 50623, because we sort of thought maybe these could be the same vulnerability at first.
Yep.
Then we sort of thought maybe the reason 50623 was getting bypassed was because of this new vulnerability, but then that's not very clear based on what Hammond was saying on X, and that's sort of where we're at now. Is we have a loose idea that threat actors are targeting this couple months old vulnerability, um, and that there's also this second vulnerability, but exactly how they interact, who's targeting them, and some of those other finer points, we don't have super conclusive knowledge on at this time.
Yeah. So apologies to anybody who is coming here to the podcast for definitive answers as to what's going on with the Cleo MFT attacks. We're obviously trying, but it's very hard to discern what's going on with this threat activity, what's being exploited, what's been patched, et cetera, as Alex just outlined. And thank you for doing that. That was very detailed.
Oh, thanks.
Uh, and I want to note and toot our own horn here for a little bit. The story that we had on this, that Ariel wrote on this, our colleague Ariel Walden, she wrote this on Monday. This was ahead of the blog post that Huntress put out Monday evening. She had followed up on a tweet that I believe Max Rogers from one of their, I think maybe the head of their threat intelligence over there at Huntress had put out about the threat activity around 50623. And so, yay for us for getting that story out. That said, we're still, like you said, we're still trying to figure out what's going on here with the situation. Initially, it looked like this was just a bad patch or an incomplete patch. There was discussions in the Huntress post, and I believe in one of the advisories that Cleo put out about, additional threat vectors for 50623. But it's, again, very murky, unclear as to what's going on with the threat activity. I'll pause here and say I have deep sympathy. I've always had deep sympathy for organizations out there that have a lot of software and have to sort through patches and updates and figure out what to prioritize and what not to prioritize and what you can maybe hold back. Patch management, vulnerability management is very tough, And it doesn't help when situations like this arise and you don't know totally what's going on. This is not a slight at Cleo or Huntress or anyone else, Rapid7, anyone else involved. This is just one of those situations, it seems like, and I don't know if you agree, Alex, where there's threat activity and there's a lot of moving parts and we don't have all the answers yet. Would you agree?
Mm, yeah, I would agree with that. Unless something is changed in the last 12 hours.
Yeah, I
But
just went on the Clio just to double check. Has there been any update here? And it does not appear that there has been, which is, I guess, good and bad. Good for us that we're not missing out on anything. Bad for the situation that we don't have, I guess, additional clarity on what's going on. The last update was, yeah, about 20 hours ago, I believe. And that was included in our latest story about the patch being pushed out. So, so what to do here? I would say, and I don't know if you agree with this. I know there's speculation out there about Termite. You mentioned Kevin Beaumont's post on Mastodon. Uh, could be Termite, who knows? The thing that's interesting is that we've seen a lot of MFT software vulnerabilities exploited by ransomware groups.
yes, last year
So
or two especially.
yeah, Fortra go anywhere.
Hmm.
Obviously, Progress Software's move and transfer attacks. I mean, that you're talking hundreds, more than 1,000, well, 2,000, I think. So I don't know. Would it surprise you if it was a ransomware gang that was doing this? Wouldn't surprise me.
I mean, it would make sense. In fact, I don't even necessarily doubt what Kevin Beaumont was saying. I have no reason to. But
Right.
I guess even Rapid 7, they could have been a little diplomatic and just saying, we don't really know. It would be speculation. We have high standards for making these attributions, which pretty much all vendors who we talk to do.
Hmm.
Um, and maybe they privately have think like, okay, maybe this group is behind it, but for the sake of maybe a media statement, they didn't want to. So yeah, I have no reason to doubt that multiple ransomware groups, including the recently blowing up Termite group, could be behind this. It's who's to say, but it wouldn't be a huge leap of logic.
Yeah. And at this point, we don't have a lot of data about who's been victimized by this. Uh, Obviously, organizations will put up data breach notifications and the various state attorneys general sites out there, attorney general offices. But so far, we don't have a lot of information. We don't really have any information that points to this situation creating attacks or breaches at any company. So we're kind of in the dark there about what's going on and who's been victimized. But I believe, did Huntress say something in their blog? I think they said double digits worth initially, and I think Sophos and other companies have sort of weighed in and said, yeah, we're seeing significant exploitation, maybe dozens of victims out there. So it's probably only a matter of time before some of these organizations do disclose for whatever that's worth. I mean, we talk about sort of the lack of detail in cybersecurity disclosures, breach disclosures all the time, but at least you can start pointing us in the right direction, perhaps about what's going on with this. I guess the other thing that's interesting here with the situation is so there's obviously IOCs that Huntress put out. I think Sophos may have some data as well. There's IP addresses and whatnot, but that doesn't mean anything. I mean, it means something, but we've we've had a number. I've talked with a number of folks lately, and I believe this came up in a recent discussion that you had with CrowdStrike about just sort of overlap between threat actors and how one threat group will piggyback off another threat group's infrastructure or use their URLs or their IP addresses, or they'll use the same bulletproof hoster or whatever. And it's hard to figure out. It's hard to triangulate where the threat activity is really coming from, especially with nation states now, the way that they sort of covertly use other countries' infrastructure and even hacking operations as like staging and CNC for their own attacks to sort of muddy the waters. Is
Yeah, I
that,
mean, and you can go even further and say individual people are sometimes associated with multiple
yeah.
threat groups. Threat groups are often working with nation states, particularly with Russia.
Hmm.
And it seems like North Korea is starting to expand in that general direction as well. And the general like attribution has become, I imagine, exceedingly difficult.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. It's you hope that with all the data that we have and with all the threat intelligence and the amount of security apparatus and infrastructure out there, that we're getting better at attribution and identifying like the at least maybe not the specific actor or group, but at least where a threat is coming from and how best to sort of cut that off and prevent it from continuing, whether it's just blocking IP addresses or URLs or what have you. Um, but this is 2024, soon to be 2025. And this stuff is really, it just feels like it's getting harder and harder to figure out what's going on in this type of window,
mhm.
in this type of 0 day window where stuff is, and we hear about this all the time. Like we hear, oh, this typhoon group or this Chinese nation state group, this was the organization that was behind these attacks on this Microsoft 0 day or something. Like these reports come out months down the road. But this information is really helpful early on in that 0 day exploitation window in the days and even weeks after something is disclosed and it starts to come under attack. I mean, it's helpful to know really everything you can about the situation, but specifically like, okay, we need to take these things offline, or we need to start looking for outgoing traffic from our organization if we think it's a ransomware group and they're exfiltrating data, or we need to block this region. We need to start sort of geofencing or whatever. So yeah, it puts organizations at another disadvantage beyond just not knowing what is
Mhm.
under attack. Um, and going back to sort of the situation with Cleo, it's too early to tell, but what do you, having written the most recent story about this, what do you think of their response so far to the situation, to the reports of the activity, to, our question about, all right, is this 50623? Is this an overlap? What is this resolve?
Um, my honest answer is I think they're panicking. I don't know if that's the most delicate way of phrasing it, but the statement I got yesterday um had the energy that it was from an outside PR firm, which is what happens when these huge vulnerabilities happen. Um the lack of outside information
Yeah.
about 50623 is fairly concerning.
Hmm.
And um the tone of the email I got with the very buttoned up statement about this new vulnerability made me think it was probably um pretty busy over there right now, I guess I would say.
Yeah.
Is that sort of your read too?
Yeah, and I think it's worth noting that they are a smaller software vendor. In fact, interestingly enough, I think there were some articles, or blog posts, whatever, that were written after the move to transfer attacks that were kind of in the vein of, here are 5 alternatives or 10 other options for MFTs, file transfer products besides move it. Which, I don't know. I don't think it's totally fair, but whatever. And I think they were mentioned on a couple of those lists, at least if memory serves. So they are a smaller vendor compared to some of the larger software companies out there that do this sort of thing, like a Citrix, for example, And Citrix, I mean, we should note their ShareFile product came under attack. I believe was it 2023? Was that? Jeez, it all blends together at a certain point.
It was all
Um,
fairly recent.
yeah, 2023 maybe, but you get the point. Um, I know that Ariel reached out to Cleo on Monday pretty early on to try to figure out, like, did they have a comment? Could they respond? They did not respond at press time. I think they may have followed up with her later and said, not commenting at the moment, whatever.
Hmm.
So, yeah, I mean, I cut them some slack. They have provided some information to the media, us. They
Yeah.
have I mean, they put a few of these updates out, obviously. I think they're probably in a situation that is a little overwhelming, and they might not have all the answers, which is why they couldn't provide a clear explanation about, hey, yeah, this resolves, this 0 day is connected to 50623, and it does fix that. And please just patch, and we think we're confident everything will be fine. Uh, Even if they are confident, they might not want to say that at the moment because it's been a very fluid situation with a lot of moving parts. So I cut them a little bit of slack, but I do think that this is another thing that if you're a company out there, if you're an enterprise, a fairly large organization, and you're using a smaller software vendor, do you have to kind of take that sort of situation and what their response is going to be into your calculus about whether or not you want to work with a company like that? And is it better to work with a bigger company? But I don't know that working with a bigger software vendor that has potentially a bigger target on its back is going to be that much more of a better bet. I think you're just kind of in a situation where maybe if you're using any MFT, you're going to be at some type of risk. Be interesting to see what the cyber insurers say about this going
Oh yeah.
forward.
They're usually pretty open when
Yeah,
it comes to this kind of topic.
yeah. So I guess any closing thoughts on the situation, on the attacks? Do you think we'll start to see the numbers go up? I mean, the patch for this 0 day, it seems like comes out on, the activity is detected over the weekend, patches out on Wednesday. Hopefully, organizations out there were prompt with their patching. But I don't know. Are you confident? Or do you think we're going to start to see a lot more victim numbers?
It's hard to tell. I
Yeah.
don't know if this is one of those things that just sort of disappears, or if it's one of those things that stays top of mind for 2 months. I think we're at the period just before we find out which of those two it's gonna be. Do you agree?
I'm a pessimist again, you know me.
Sure.
2024 me was supposed to be more optimistic, but hasn't worked out so well. I do wonder if you're talking about a lot of companies that, you mentioned the 3 products that are involved, very diverse names with those products, even though they kind of are all the same type of product. Anyway, uh, they probably have a lot of mid-market customers, maybe even some smaller business customers. And I don't, God, I hope they are promptly patching.
Hmm.
But I know that the smaller the organization, sometimes the tougher it is to pull your limited IT resources and staff away from what they're doing, which is trying to keep operations going, and tell them like, yeah, you got to patch this, and we don't like you got to patch it immediately, and you got to take stuff offline, or you've got to pull stuff back a little bit. That's tough. That's a tough proposition, and that's even like considering that they know about it, right? I mean,
Right.
Did you know Cleo before this happened?
The
I
name sounded familiar, but Cleo is also a short word. It's a name. It's hard.
Yeah,
Probably not really is the best answer I could give you.
right. I had heard of them in passing, but I didn't know much about the company, the background, all the products, etc. So I don't know.
Yeah.
I fingers crossed is what I'll say. And I'm trying
Sure.
not to be pessimistic. I'm trying to look forward
Hmm.
to 2025. Um,
And yeah.
but you're right. I think we're at a point where hopefully soon we're going to get more answers about this. What is going on with the CVE and the non-CVE and what the overlap is there. Clarity is good. But with that clarity, we may find out that a lot more organizations have been affected by these attacks. So we will keep our readers and listeners up to date as best we can on the situation. But
Hmm.
Alex, I thank you for taking us through the situation and all of the moving parts and advisories and technical details and descriptions. And I really appreciate it because I didn't have to do it. So thank you.
Oh, no problem.
And thank you to the readers and listeners of Search Security and the Risk and Repeat podcast. I'm Rob Wright, and we'll see you next time.